Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Lana Kay. Well, we have a very special guest with us today. He is from Walton, Kentucky, and his name is Lee Frakes. Welcome to the program, Lee.
Lana Kay, appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, Lee has had a very successful life. He was married for many years. He has a daughter. His career was with Brown and Williamson out of Louisville, Kentucky. He's lived in Walton many years, and he served about 10 years on the Walton City Council. So, well, everything you're thinking, well, that's a pretty normal life. Well, not exactly, because something very extraordinary happened to Lee. Let's turn back the clock to the year 1941. The United States is embroiled in World War II, and Lee Frakes is a student at Lloyd High School in Erlanger, Kentucky. He has an incredible story to tell us about that time. Let's go back to Lloyd High School, Lee.
Well, it was in 1941 after the war with Japan, and I was in English class in 1941, and I got a call to go down to the auditorium, and there was a lieutenant colonel from Fort Thomas, and he came over and asked me how my health was and my age, and I told him I'd be 18 and 1942. He said, "You're now in the Army Air Force." And 2 days later, I was at Union Terminal on a train going to Texas for training to fly in a B-17. And that's how it all started then.
Okay.
And I took training there, and we formed a crew of 10 people, and we got to be a family, and we knew everything about everybody, and we started our training in 42. We flew all over Texas, Randolph Field and Galveston and so forth, and after we finished our training, we ferried our plane, which was called Good Pickin', and we ferried it to Andrews Air Base, to Iceland, and to Greenland, and over to England, and I was put in the 8th Air Force.
Let's take a look at a B-17. This was known in World War II as a Flying Fortress.
Flying Fortress. Mm-hmm.
And Lee was the radio man. This is also Lee's model of that great airplane, the B-17. So Lee, keep going for us.
Well, we got settled in England, and I was in the 305th 92nd Squadron, and we flew missions out of England when the weather was permissible, but most of the time it was raining, but we'd start flying our mission. And on February the 8th was the main mission that I was involved in.
And let's take a look at the crew now. Let's look at these guys before you tell us what happened on that fateful date.
Okay.
So this is his crew, and you can see on the plane is Good Pickin', which he just told us. And Lee is in the top row, and he is third from the left. So that is young Lee Frakes. Okay, Lee?
So back to February the 8th, we got up that morning to make a mission, and we found out it was going to be in Germany, and that was always a bad mission because it took a lot of time. It took probably round trip about 10 hours. So we started the mission off and got to our target and dropped our bombs on the target and turned around to come back, and we hit a flak field. That was pieces of metal that was shot from the ground up, and I received flak in my back, and that's where I was wounded at. And then we kept on our mission to come home back to the base, and all at once we was attacked by the German Luftwaffe, and they was Me-109s, Messerschmitts, and they hit the plane with 20-millimeter guns head on.
Did you see them coming?
Oh yes.
Did you know we're in trouble?
Yeah, we had two planes right next to us.
Okay.
And they fired upon the nose of the plane and just tore the whole front end of the plane off. So the pilot, he said, "Get ready to bail out." And of course, when he said that, the plane was hit again and killed all five up in the front end of the plane. Killed the bombardier, the navigator, the pilot, the co-pilot, and the engineer, 5 people. And so after that happened, I was in the waist of the plane, and I notified the rest of the men that was there, the waist gunner, tail gunner, and the ball turret men. And I told them, I said, we're gonna have to bail out. So I went up across the bomb bay and to the front of the plane and to make sure everybody was deceased. And it was, all of them were dead, all 5 were dead. And then I came back and 2 or 3 had already jumped out with the parachutes.
Okay, was your parachute on at this
No,
point?
it was off the ground. It was an Irving parachute. It was a chest chute.
Okay.
You picked it up and put it on the base.
Okay.
And
So
as I
3
mentioned,
had already jumped.
3 had already jumped, and the planes were shooting them in parachutes, so I didn't know who they were shooting, because I didn't know who they was. I mean, you couldn't tell by just looking at the parachute. And at that time, we had an atheist that was a member of the crew. He was, his religion, we were all different religions. And I told him, I said, you have to jump. And of course, we was flying at 25.
Is it just you and him left in the plane now?
Left in the plane, and it was flying at 25,000 feet. And so he stood on the doorway holding on to both sides, and he just wouldn't move. He was froze there. So I said, well, there wasn't nothing I could do but kick him out. So I kicked him out, and the last thing I heard him say, God help me.
Oh,
So then I bailed out, and then it didn't take long to hit the ground. I'd say maybe 40 minutes or so, something like that.
40 seconds.
No.
40 minutes.
40 minutes, because the plane was,
Really?
the thing was going in every direction, the chute. It would go up and down, the wind was blowing, and we was up 25,000 feet.
So, wow, that's a long
So
way.
then I was taken away from where the plane actually crashed. I was way far away. I was maybe 20 miles into Belgium. That's where I came down, in Belgium. And when I came down, the first thing we were supposed to do was bury our parachute so the enemy couldn't find out any information or find out
That you were
there
even
in that
there,
location.
right?
So after that, I stayed there all night, and I took leaves and put in my back of my heated suit to stop the blood in my back from bleeding. And
Now, are you in much pain?
well, I was in pain, but you didn't pay. I was so involved with everything, I didn't
Trying to figure out what to do next.
where I was at. I didn't
Right.
even know where I was at. So I saw an old man and a young boy coming into the field where I was at, and they had a hoe on their back, and they
Farmer.
was digging for winter onions. This was in February the 8th. And I didn't do anything at first. I waited.
Where are you that
I'm
they
in
couldn't
10
see
miles.
you?
I
I
was-
know, but where are you on their place that they couldn't see you?
Well, I was back in a brush.
Just
bunch of
hiding in
trees,
the-
Just hiding in there.
Okay,
And so finally I said, I'm gonna wait another day to make sure there wasn't any Germans around. And they came the next morning, early in the morning, and I stepped out in front of them and held up my hands and told them I was an American aviator. So they didn't say anything, they left. So I went back to hiding. In about 2 hours they came back and whistled. And I knew who it was then. I could tell it was one I had talked to. So they took me into the house. It was a farmhouse. And the lady of the house, over about 6 days, took care of my wounds and seen it was healed up. And during this time, the man of the house had contacted the French underground. And the French underground would help
oh, sure.
any airman that was shot down. So he took me there to introduce me to the French underground, and the OSS was there too. That was the Office of Strategic Service, which was Secret Service today, but this is called OSS
At that time.
at that time. And so they told me, said that, well, you got a choice to do. You can either go to a neutral country and wait till the war is over, or you can try to go home. So I said, I didn't know if the war was gonna last 10 years or 5 years or whatever. So I said, no, I'd like to go home. So they made me a passport that I used. It was
Here's a picture of Lee's French passport where he is known as,
Jacques Bernot, that was my name. And I was 37 years old and had 6 children.
oh my goodness.
But I showed it a number of times. to
And
the
it
Gestapo.
passed.
Yeah,
And you passed.
Yeah.
They
Of course,
didn't
I
think
was-
about that age.
Oh, no, and I was in civilian clothes, naturally. I didn't
Sure,
have
they
no-
just, I guess they just couldn't have believed
well,
that
they
you
didn't-
were,
They was Russian, you know.
sure, so they didn't,
flew in there.
okay.
So then they told me that I had to go into France, and then from France into Spain, and I had to cross the Pyrenees Mountains, which was located on the Spanish
Border.
France border. And so
So you know your trek, but
we
how
had to
are,
go south. Well,
how-
we had a small little thing, what they call it?
A compass?
A small compass. And you just follow the compass and went south. And I'm not going through to tell what we ran into. I mean, we did everything. We stole bicycles, we broke into stores to get food. And
now when you say we, you were with someone?
yes, I was paired up with a Canadian Air Force man from the Royal Canadian Air Force. He had been shot down. He was a pilot and a fighter. And we was paired up together. They always done that because if one got hurt or killed, the other one could pass on to what happened.
What happened to it? Okay, now does he have a passport too? And
Oh, yeah,
does he
he
have
was-
the ID just like you?
just
So
like
he,
I did,
he's a French countryman too?
yeah.
Okay, so the
Both
two.
had French
we-
passports.
Two of you are together though?
Oh, yeah.
You did have a partner, okay, so,
If one got hurt or something,
yeah,
take
they
care of
could,
each other.
sure.
Yeah. So we traveled at night all the time.
Only at night? Well, where
Only
were
at
you
night.
in the day?
In the day, we was hiding out at barns and
Just would
also-
wait all day
Yeah,
somewhere?
And we met people, farmers mostly, and talked to them, and they fed us and so forth. But, of course, the weather was cold. I mean, it was in February, and we had to travel all from Belgium, which was 20 miles from the French from the French border.
Okay,
And then we took off there and went into France, stayed in the Notre Dame for a day or two, and went on down, kept going south and traveled at night, mostly on country roads. And we got to the Pyrenees Mountain and met a guide that was going to take us over the mountain. And he took us over the Pyrenees Mountain, was 7,000 feet high. So we marched across the snow and everything, and to get to the frontier line between France and Spain, which was a neutral country, and the guy says, see the little house down there? And the little house looked like a box of cigars. And he said, that is where you're going to be picked up by the Spanish people. So me and a Canada man and myself, we took and started down that side of the mountain. And we got down there, and they arrested us right away and threw in a Spanish prison.
oh, Lee,
We was in a Spanish prison.
what a
16
letdown.
16 days, but we got potatoes every day. We eat potatoes every day. And then they contacted the American consul in Spain, and they came and got us out.
So it was neutral, so why did they put you in jail? Why?
Well, they looked at our passport, and it was never the French people anyway.
Okay,
So,
Okay,
but
I
they wanted to
understand.
make sure you was who
I
you
understand.
said. And so once the American consul got there, he said, now you go through Spain, and then you'll come to Gibraltar,
okay,
which was an island belonging to the British people.
Okay.
It was a colony for the British. So we did that, and so we got to the Gibraltar, and we took there and stayed there about 3 days, and we caught a flight back to England. And the
That's-
flight was, the actual mission that I went on, we traveled 2,200 miles.
2,200 miles.
miles. And then I got back to England, and D-Day had already started. June the 6th was D-Day.
But you don't know really anything
No, no.
about what's going on. You're just trying to
And
stay
so when I
alive.
got there, they interrogated me for 2 or 3 days, and they handed me my papers and said, here, get back to the United States as best way you can. And that was it.
So
I-
did you think there was going to be more help?
Oh, well,
Weren't you pretty shocked that, I think I've made
well,
it?
they were so involved with D-Day. I mean, they had,
Oh, yeah,
you're
so
looking at the
horrible.
channel, English Channel, it was just covered with boats, and planes were going over, and they was towing planes and everything. and they wasn't really interested in me.
Yeah, I can, when we can, and you can understand now.
Oh, yeah, sure, I could understand. And so anyway, I went from one place to the other. I went to boats, harbors, and I went to the airfields, and I went everywhere. So after about 10 days,
Now, is your Canadian still with you?
No,
may I
no,
ask?
he
You're
went-
cut loose now, you're alone.
Canadian Council already picked him up.
Okay,
So I was trying to find a place to get back, something going to the United States. And so finally I was in a bar one day drinking a beer, and a Master Sergeant came in, and I said, "What are you doing, Sergeant?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to get a beer, but I had to get back to a plane." General Spatz was there. He was going back to Andrews
my.
Base. So I said, "Sergeant, I sure like to get on that plane." So he went back, talked to General Spatz, and he said, "Yeah, get him on here." So 8 hours later, I was Andrews Air Base.
oh my goodness.
So that was the,
But so you were you surprised that after all you'd been through, it went pretty quick once you made that connection?
of course, I was in bad shape, really.
Okay.
I dropped down to didn't weigh just a little over 100 pounds, and I took in, I was still in the Air Force. I mean, I was down in the Air Force. I was still in the Air Force, and, but once you're shot down, you're not involved with fighting anymore. You're done, because if you're picked up by the Germans, you was automatically killed with the firing squad. I mean, that was it. Once you get civilian clothes, you was already.
You were done with that part of it.
So they sent me down to Miami Beach, Collins Avenue, which belonged to the Air Force, and they fed me and doctored me and got me in shape again, and then they sent me to Iceberg, Tennessee, as a training officer down there. So I was down there training, and all at once the war was over.
Yes.
So then the war was over, and then I went home. But during that time, I was on furlough for 30 days. I was home, with the family and so forth. But then after being physically put back on in the Miami Beach, then they sent me to Iceberg, and I stayed there till the war was over. So that was my whole try. And really, there was a lot of funny things happened, traveling with talking to people and things like that. I remember one instance, we was in this farmhouse, and the lady said, "I heard you're from Kentucky." I said, "Yes, ma'am, I'm from Kentucky." And she said, "Can you cook fried chicken?" Well, I never cooked a chicken in my life. I was only 19 years old at that time. And so she brought in a rooster, and had real long legs, and I said, "My Lord." I told the Canadian was with me, I said, "That thing, you'd have to boil him, you was gonna eat him." So he said, "We got to try. These people are giving us something, to eat all the time." So usually in France, when you eat breakfast, you had hot soup or had some broth or something, and you dipped your bread. They always had lots of bread.
Bread, okay.
So I took and boiled the rooster, and then I fried it. They didn't have flour, they had cracked corn, and I took and fried it in cracked corn, and it wasn't too bad. It was eatable. And so the next morning we got up, and we was going to get back on the road again, and I smelled something. And the Canadian said, "Yeah, what is that smell?" He said, "That must be a soup of some sort that they're going to feed us." So we went down to the kitchen. We was upstairs, went down to the kitchen, and sure enough, there was a broth, and it was so bad I couldn't even think about eating it. So after about 10 or 15 minutes, and we told them we had to leave, and I said, "By the way, what kind of soup was that?" And they said, "Feather soup." They took that feathers from that rooster and cooked it, boiled it, and we had feather soup. But it was terrible. We couldn't eat it.
You couldn't even stand the smell of it.
Yeah.
Lee, also there was something, somebody got a surprise. Of course, at home they didn't know what happened to you.
That's
They
correct.
knew that the plane was shot down.
I was missing in action
So,
all the time.
what happened? How did they get word? What happened when you got word home?
I got a flight from Andrews Air Base to Indianapolis, and it was in Indianapolis. I got phones at that day was still the old rinky-dinkies. And so anyway, I called home, and my grandmother was there in the house, and she answered the phone, and when I told her who it was, she fainted.
Sure.
But then after a while, we got neighbor came in and all that stuff.
Got her
Yeah,
up
yeah,
and got her back going because, Lee, I guess they thought you were gone. And
Oh,
when you
yeah, it
said
was-
this is Lee after you were gone 6 months,
Yeah, a little over 6 months,
that
almost.
that they didn't have any word, and they just assumed
That's right.
you didn't make it.
Yeah, I was missing in action.
Uh-huh.
And, but anyway, it all came out. and-
That's a great story. Let me ask you this, Lee. Have you ever wondered, looking back, why me? Why did I survive?
Well, we was all young. I mean, I think the oldest one was a pilot and a co-pilot. They was only 23 or 24 years old. We was young and full of vigor, and I get calls when I go to make speeches or anything or talks. Was you scared? Well, you never had time to be scared. When you're up here in the air, 25,000 feet and 25 or 40 degrees below zero, you wasn't thinking about much else watching. You was watching for the enemy planes and what was going on.
You were so busy, you don't really have time to
right.
feel fear.
The only time that I was actually scared is we went on to a mission and we lost a couple of, the number 1 motor and the number 4 motor we lost. But the plane still come in, and as soon as you hit the ground, the crew, maintenance people were right there to find out what they needed to do to get it going the next day. And one of the master sergeant crew chief, he came over to me and said, "Lee, you hurt?" And I said, "No, I'm hurt." He said, "Well, I wanted you to look at this radio room." And every 6 or 10 inches crisscrossed, the whole radio was bullet holes.
Oh, Lee.
And I said, "My Lord," I got to shaking. And he said, "You better get over to PX and get you something to drink." So I went over there and got something to drink. But that was the only time I could say, I was scared when I was in that parachute, don't get me wrong. I never had bailed out or nothing else. And when you're jumping out and you don't see the ground,
You're just jumping into nothing.
you didn't know where you was at. And I seen all these parachutes. I mean, not 1 or 2, but maybe 100.
The sky is
200
filled.
filled with parachutes, because after the war was over and this here back in this last year, we found out that the 8th Air Force lost more personnel than the Navy and the Marines together.
Lee.
It was really something else. I mean, but
They were shooting the parachutes out from,
I was watching.
You watching them just go down.
The chute itself, and then they fell to the
then of
ground.
course you'd fall to your death.
Yeah.
So you're watching that as you're swaying and going down
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
So Lee, if you had it, so then there's a lot of people that believe in, these experiences have, empowered your life. If you had it if you could say this never happened, would you take it, or do you say, no, it was such a life experience?
If I was back around 20 years old and they asked me to go back into the service, I'd go in a minute.
Sure.
Because that's what if you like your country at all, you've got to help make freedom come to you.
That's right.
So anyway, that's out of the question. When they walked into Lloyd High School and told me that I was in the Army Air Force, I had never even saw an airplane. I'll be truthful with you. I've heard about them. When you went to the picture show, once in a while they'd show something on there.
Sure.
You knew what they was doing, but you didn't know they was bombing people and stuff like that. But it was, I can't say it was exciting, because once you're there, because you never know what's going to happen from one day to the next. And when you travel 2,200 miles, and just the two of you together, and most of the time you slept out on the ground. But a lot of times we went into mostly farmers. We was taught to always go to the farmhouse, and we stayed out of the big cities. But
And they were always welcoming. Did anyone turn you away?
no, never.
No
had
one
nobody-
never did turn away?
Turn you away. A lot of them didn't have no food because the Germans were taking all the food.
Nobody had the food. Okay, so did you stay in touch with your Canadian counterpart?
No, I did for about a year or a year and a half, and he got married and his family
People
and so
get
forth.
busy and-
But I talked to the French people over there, and they wrote letters, and now I'm getting letters from the grandchildren of the people I was
Of the
with.
people that helped you
Helped me.
in the French
That's right.
countryside.
And, no, they was all nice. I mean, they treated us well, and if you needed, like the first place I was in after I hit the ground, she doctored me up. And
Yes.
she was no doctor. She was just a farm lady that knew how to handle animals and things like that.
Yes.
But really and truly, it was something you'll never forget. And I nowadays belonging to the VFW, and I was a charter member of the VFW. I helped start it in 1946. And the Ralph Fulton Post, a lot of people don't know, but it was named for the first fatality in the war in Erlanger. His name was Ralph Fulton, and that's what they named the Ralph Fulton Post.
Is that right? Yes, I know that's in Erlanger, and I
Yeah,
know
it's
you've been
in-
very active in Walton.
Yeah, in Walton, when I was on I ran for city council, and Phil Tarsup was the mayor at that time, and I told him, I said, one thing on my mind is I'd like to build a memorial, because there was no memorials around anywhere much. And so myself and Dennis Clacken
Yes.
and Ann Leake, who's now passed away, the three of us was spearheaded that, but all the people in Walton and Verona, when we went around begging for things at auction off and going to dinners and so forth, they all involved in that. And we got a beautiful memorial.
Yes, you're second best in the country, you were telling me.
I think it's around the second best in the country.
So Lee's, you've been with us today. This is Lee Frakes talking about his World War II experience. This is more detailed, but for today's show, we tried to keep this to a half an hour to give you some of the highlights of it. But Lee does his talk. Many times it's on around Veterans Day, the 4th of July, Memorial Day, November the 11th, Veterans Day. So watch your newspaper, because you can go in person and hear him. And Lee, just thank you so much
Thank you.
for being my guest today.
This is my first effect on the DC.
Yes, you did, but you have done a great job. And listen, thank you for this sacrifice and your military that I hope everybody out here appreciated this story as much as I did. To you and all the veterans, thank you for your service in keeping this country free, especially if there are young people out there today. Try to put yourself at 17 years old. Do you think you could have made it? I've thought about that many times myself. So as always, I hope you enjoyed him as much as I did. And as always, be happy and keep smiling, and I'll see you soon.